And the Democratic Party will officially nominate its presidential candidate at the National Convention in Chicago. That's next month. Vice President Harris wants her fellow Democrats to rally around her quickly, as there's a campaign money question that looms since President Biden's departure from the race. News 4 Tucson's political specialist Eric Fink joining us now with more. Eric.
Angela, good evening to you. The Harris for President campaign has raised an astounding $81 million in the first 24 hours since President Biden dropped out. But what about the reported more than $200 million the Biden-Harris campaign had on hand before yesterday? That's a big question with a little more than 100 days to go in this historic run for the White House.
The next week or two is obviously critical for consolidating support if the nominee is going to be Vice President Harris.
The Harris campaign for president begins with a single-day record, $81 million coming into its coffers in just 24 hours. But the money in President Biden's re-election effort almost tripled that number. And that campaign money, U of A political science professor Chad Westerland says, can go to Vice President Harris since she was already on the ticket.
Ballots drop here in Arizona in the second week of October.
Right.
So really, it's not 3.5 months. How can they do this in such a compressed amount of time?
I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine if it wasn't somebody who was already on the ticket and a part of the apparatus. One simple thing, as far as I understand it, will be transferring the campaign money from Biden to a Harris.
As Harris rakes in more cash and looks to lock up the number of delegates needed to win the nomination before the DNC in Chicago next month, Westerland knows the Trump campaign is already zeroing in on their likely opponent.
The Trump campaign will pivot this week, today, to making their campaign about Vice President Harris.
And Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, the moderate Democrat in his first full term in the Senate, on the short list as a possible vice presidential running mate to Harris, should she win the nomination. Now, a spokesman for Kelly telling me a short time ago this afternoon the senator is on a congressional delegation trip to England. The Senate is back in session in Washington tomorrow. The senator's office says it won't comment on any private conversations that may have been had. I'm Eric Fink, News 4 Tucson.